You're listening to the Light Novel Podcast. Visit us online at lightnovelpodcast.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Light Novel Podcast. We have a really special podcast today, and that is because we have Sam Pinansky from J-Novel Club joining us, and he's going to tell us all about J-Novel Club, but it's become an incredibly huge player in the English translation light novel business, and it's only 2 years old. It's just going to be celebrating actually its 2-year anniversary this month. So 2 years and pretty much become one of the big boys in the club, and starting at the end of this year or very early in 2019, moving not just doing eBooks but also moving into print. So an incredibly exciting time for light novel fans and for J-Novel Club. So with me tonight to bombard Sam with questions and queries, I have Jean-Luc.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
I have Terrence.
Hey, how's it going?
And I have Tom.
What's up?
All right, fantastic. And without further ado, our very special guest, we have Sam from J-Novel Club.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me, and I'm really glad to be here on, it's almost our 2-year anniversary of J-Novel Club.
Fantastic. So, Sam, you know what? You're probably best to tell us who you are and what you do. So, how about you give everybody a little bit of a rundown on your life story?
Well, I don't think people care so much about my whole life story, but limiting it maybe to the light novel part of it. My name is Sam Pinansky, and I am the president and founder of J-Novel Club. Like I mentioned just a bit ago, we started about 2 years ago on October 15th in 2016. And since then, we've published nearly 200 volumes of light novels digitally as ebooks. And coming soon, we'll also be starting our first print books, which will be coming out in early February next year. So J-Novel Club is a licensor. We officially license light novels from Japan, from basically, all the Japanese publishers that we can. And then we translate them into English and edit them and check them and release them both on our website for subscribers and also then as ebooks on all the major ebook retailers, Amazon, Kobo, Nook, Bookwalker, basically every place that you can buy ebooks, we try and put our books on there. So that's what basically in a nutshell what J-Novel Club is. And I'm here to, promote our new releases and talk about our business and how I got started and everything. So hopefully you guys have a lot of interesting questions. If I can maybe go into my background a little bit though. So before I started J-Novel Club about 2 years ago, I've been in Japan. I live in Japan, and I've been here for almost 11 years now. I first came over as a PhD, not a student, but a PhD graduate, and as a postdoc in theoretical physics. But that quickly turned into, let's just say that string theory didn't pan out. And I decided that, hey, I really love living in Japan. I want to stay here for, if I can. And one of the things that I could do was translate. And so I became one of the very first simulcast anime translators back about 10 years ago. Well, more like 8-9 years ago. And I translated shows like Shugokara and Hyakko and then went on to translate many, many more shows over the next many years. I continued to work in localization, actually finding other translators and editors to help me. And I, of course, sort of created a group. And I worked for companies like Tezuka Productions and Yomiuri Television, localizing not just anime, but dramas and variety shows and movies, all for distribution worldwide in English. So I had sort of a background in localization primarily and understanding how to translate, edit, check TV shows and subtitles. But of course, in the process of that, I worked with many, many Japanese companies, including companies like Kodansha, Kadokawa. In fact, I worked directly with Kadokawa to subtitle the Haruhi movie back in the day. And so I had a relationship with them. And I had relationships with TV Tokyo and Fuji and many other companies. So when I saw that when I saw the demand for light novels that was out there in the community, I thought to myself, well, I know the translators and I know the editors. How much harder could it be translating a novel than translating anime, right? Haha. That was supposed to be sarcasm. And I know the licensors. I know some of the publishing companies. I have connections in the industry. I have a computer science degree from Carnegie Mellon. I can program a website. Sure, let's just do it. And that's basically what I did. I have the tools, I had the resources and the connections, and from a fairly long history of working in the industry in general. And that's where J Novel Club started.
Awesome. Fantastic. Wow. Quite the journey, eh? From anime to light novels. And now,
I think
were you
I think the theoretical
into
physics to anime was actually a bigger journey, personally, but
Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of theoretical physics at play in a lot of anime. I mean, come on.
yeah, to tell you the truth, I don't think there's anyone more appropriate to be doing all these multiple dimension stories than me, as my actual thesis was about 10-dimensional math.
Well, there you go. Perfect. I mean, from 10-dimensional math to isekai, I mean, it makes sense. So now, were you a fan of light novels before you started getting into light novel publishing, or was that just you recognized with your connections with the fan community that it was a niche that was being underserved?
I would say the latter is more appropriate. In fact, during 2015, at the time I was working for a company called Viewster. I had, like I think I mentioned, I saw the need in the community, and the first thing I did actually was to study light novels. And I went and I bought a bunch of light novels to read them and sort of understand more about how they were constructed and the type of content it was, because I had never actually sat down and read through a whole light novel in Japanese before. I had actually read the Haruhi novels in English. Some weird history. I actually helped proofread the very first Haruhi novel in English back in the day for some reason. I think I got like $200 for it. I was not credited, but the point is, however, I went and I sort of researched light novels and took a deep dive into the publishers and who was publishing what and what the price points were and the publishing schedules. I was not really very familiar with all that before I started seriously creating a business plan. But as part of creating the business plan, I did months of research.
All right. So now, other than Haruhi, what was one of the first light novels that you picked up then in your grand study?
Well, the two novels I read mostly, I guess you could say, one of them I think everybody here will probably be familiar with, but was actually How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, which, of course, back then did not have its English title yet. And I read the first two volumes of that. The reason I chose that one was because literally I felt I went to the bookstore and I was like, well, Kodansha is a publisher I have connections to, so I can probably license stuff from them, I think. That's basically I guessed, and I went, well, let's see, what are they pushing that looks really, really light novel-y? Here we go.
And cute half-clothed demon cat elf girls. Yeah.
I mean, the
title.
title has Demon Lord, Isekai, Shokan, and slavery in it. I mean,
I never realized how light novelly that title is.
Oh, let me continue with the other book that I read, and I actually read all I think 10 volumes. I read 9. I think it has 9 volumes. Is a light novel I highly doubt anyone on this has heard of. Of course, it has never had an English release. It's actually called Shapple, SH@PPLE, which supposedly is supposed to be a combination of shuffle and trouble or something. I don't know, but it's a twins, male, girl, boy, identical twins, cross-dressing as each other and going to each other's schools, comedy, sort of not really harem, but like multiple complicated relationship web insanity book, and I really really liked it actually. I think it's really old. It's from 2007 or something. I mean,
Well,
old
it's
as
not
for light
that
novels
old.
anyway. Yeah, but light novels don't come out very. I think it might actually be 2004, and it's actually by Fujimi Shobo, in case anybody's curious. But I just I think that reading that book and how I got into it actually kind of made me understand a bit more about how light novels are appealing in the serialized long form story that they were. Since I had only read like 2 volumes of How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, and I got the the gist of it, how that was going to go. But basically, I went and when I read Chapel, I really got into it. I read like all 8 volumes in like I think it was like a week. That was basically how fast I read it. So, I mean, I do read Japanese, and I read Japanese fairly quickly when I need to, and that's basically how I did my major study. After that, I did read a little bit of a number of other novels, but some I ended up licensing, some I didn't. Like, for example, I read a little bit of How a Realist Hero Rebuilt the Kingdom before choosing that one. Was one of our first licenses from Overlap. So I do try and read at least a little bit of the books that I'm going to license, but of course, in many cases, what I really go off of is user feedback and reviews and sales numbers, and I try not to rely as much on my own personal taste, and I think that's a smart decision.
Yeah.
So I had a question that was basically, how much do you read ahead when you're deciding the license? So it sounds like a little bit, but not necessarily, like a whole series or everything that's out. You go off of, obviously, fan feedback. But I was going to ask, was there anything that surprised you, of things that you've licensed, that got to their final volume, or later in the series, something that was in there that kind of surprised you that you maybe didn't expect when you licensed it? I kind of was thinking of it with like How Not to Summon a Demon Lord. I think Volume 3 had something kind of controversial in that one. And Blue Stale Blasphemer, it's Volume 4, I thought ended, it was like a very sudden ending. I was wondering if there's ever anything that like you just didn't see, coming when you licensed a series that surprised you.
To address the 2 points you brought up, actually, as first, How Not to Summon a Demon Lord already had 5 or 6 volumes out when I was looking at it, and to be completely honest, actually, the reason why we didn't license that immediately was because of some reservations I had. But those reservations were eventually overcome by the demand, shall we say, and the upcoming anime. Then secondarily, the other title you mentioned, Blue Steel Blasphemer, actually, the fact that it ended at 4 volumes was already known. The fact that Volume 4 had just come out when we started, and actually was one of the appealing reasons why I licensed it in the first place, because I knew it was only 4 volumes, and that was less of a risk, especially in the early days. Licensing a ton of 30-volume series is a really risky move. But that series had 4 volumes, and it looked like even though maybe the story was not as complete as some other volumes, like some other series, that each volume in itself told a decent story. So I felt like that would be a good pickup, and it did sold very well. And although people, they see that the story was rushed at the end and there was more story to tell, I think people actually are fairly satisfied with it, in that it's enjoyable for what exists, and it's very good world building. So it's a pretty good series. Now, to your general point about other series that we've published, where I was a little bit surprised about the content after the first couple of volumes. So far, there hasn't been anything like that, because there's only a couple series there where we've licensed something where it only had a couple books out. Everything else, there had already been many books out already, and we're still catching up. So there hasn't been anything that's been really surprising. I guess there have been a couple of cases, and I can't say specifically, where I'm a little bit surprised that a series ended up not continuing when I thought it would continue. And oftentimes that is due to the author themselves, and not really about anything in terms of the market or publishing, and it's just real life stuff with the author. So those are things that are totally out of our control, and so we can only do our best when it comes to predicting that kind of thing, even though it's almost impossible.
Yeah, like my big sister lives in a fantasy world. I think the final volume, the author had plans to possibly continue.
Well,
But I think he said his real life kind of came
another
up.
series where the fact that it was over at that volume level was already known in advance. So that wasn't a surprise. I also understood that series, there were other plans. And actually, to mention it, that author actually went on to publish another series with Earthstar novels, which actually, this is a bit of a spoiler, but it turns out at the very end of that he ties the universes together. So
Oh, wow.
so he's actually that author has even there might be plans to bring those characters back in some form or another, as the author is continuing to publish just with other publishers. So who knows? We might license that too and bring the whole panoply as it goes. Big Sister was a decent seller, so we'll see.
All right.
All right. Jean-Luc, did you have a question or two you want to ask?
Well, there's one that, well, I have a couple of questions, but let's start with one. So what's your favorite genre of story? Let's say action or like sci-fi?
Oh, sure. Me personally, I definitely love the combination of sci-fi and fantasy. I think I love well, I love it. I love it especially when a fantasy world turns out to be sci-fi, or there's scientific explanations to the fantasy that seems like a fantasy at first. Like that's the kind of thing I really enjoy personally. And there are some examples of that in light novels, but it's pretty rare actually. The fantasy tends to be fairly simplistic fantasy, or just a derivative of Tolkien and normal fantasy, or derivative of Japanese RPG settings, especially with the rules and stuff. And some of our books are a little different, like The Faraway Paladin. I don't know. I always pronounce that wrong. Which is based very very much on D&D. So that's cool. But then there's other books that we do, like The Magic in This Other World is Too Far Behind, which has its own sort of pseudo-modern / fantasy magic system, which is very complicated. So I kind of like the fantasy novels, but with a complicated setting, is my own personal taste. And in the same way, I also really love like crazy sci-fi. Like Last and First Idol that I licensed, that was pretty much a personal choice. So that's my bag. I was a huge Asimov fan when I was a kid, and I read the Robot series was cool, but I love the Foundation series and the high concept of the sort of later books of the Foundation series, and entire planets with their own consciousness and replacing brains with the neural computers. That was my bag.
I had a similar question. I'm just going to kind of throw it out there. Is there a genre you think is being underserved, either in Japan or America? Is there one that just isn't getting as much play as you think it could, or there's a market for it? And is there any trends that you've noticed developing in Japan in terms of, genre or themes?
Sure. Well, when you're talking about underserved genres, there's sort of two questions there. There's, so maybe I'll ask you to clarify. Are you talking about genres that you wish Japanese authors would write more of, or are you talking about genres that you wish or Western companies would license more of?
I think I'm talking about, well, for America, I would be thinking of things that fans want that aren't being licensed, and then in Japan, stories that aren't necessarily being told. So kind of both.
To answer your first question, I don't think there's a particular genre which is being has a bunch of people saying we want this, but just isn't getting licensed. I think if there are a bunch of people going we want this, that they tend to get licensed. But there is something that, of course, is underserved, which is really long series. There are many series that are just too many volumes for most Western companies to take the risk on, which probably are popular enough if they were new, but are difficult sells because of their length currently. Like maybe an example. Well, I don't want to list off the examples because I try not to reference series we haven't actually licensed yet, but. I think you know which ones I'm talking about. But on the other flip side of the coin, in Japan, obviously the big dog in the room is isekai, the otherworld stories, and that is still very much like a large percentage of what's being written, both on web novels and on light novels. If anything, it's still growing, I think, in terms of percentage. As per sort of what the underserved genres are, light novels have never really been that broad of a genre. It's always been, somewhere around the realm of fantasy, and maybe there was a time period around the Orta emo time when it was school harem comedy. It was like the main thing. But and then there was the combinations like fantasy school academy comedy slash adventure action. Genres outside of that have always been parts of light novels, but never really particularly large, like mystery or drama or things like that. So I'm not sure. I mean, there's plenty of genres which have never really been touched on in the light novel realm, from everything from like historical. There are some minor historical novels, I suppose, and there are gourmet novels, which is a genre that doesn't really exist in the West, I don't think, in terms of literature. Let's see, what other genres? Well, mecha is another minority light novel genre that is definitely out there, but has never really gotten big or small, I don't think. And I guess like other genres, specifically like say LGBT type books, it's still extremely rare. Even like just Yuri, which I'm not sure I count as LGBT in terms of literature. We can debate that in a whole nother podcast. But you know what I mean. And that there isn't really that many of those novels either. So I think that I would say, aside from the big main genres like fantasy and the associated things near fantasy, everything is underserved in terms of light novels. There isn't very much diversity. There's a ton of books and web novels being published, but in terms of the major ones, it's all the same. I think. Yeah. I think if you look at the list, if you look at Justus's top 10 light novels, you'll see that there really isn't very much diversity in Japan, and that's a problem. But one that let me address your other part of your question. So you're saying, well, what kind of trends do I see? What I'm seeing actually is the maturation of isekai. So I think a lot of people thought isekai was going to die, and then there would be something else, like, what would replace it? I don't know, reverse harem or something. But actually, what's happened instead is that isekai is sort of growing up, and you're seeing more stories where that maybe is, in the title or something, but where the actual plot is more serious, and it has, you're not going to see as many the OP isekai, how like just going around killing one-shotting everything and collecting girls. You're going to see stories that have a more serious construction over a longer span, and I think that actually a lot of Japanese light novel publishers are scouring web novel sites like Naro for these new authors that are writing something which is popular but has a bit more meat to it to hit, frankly, the people who grew up on isekai web novels when they were, 17, 18, 19 and are now in college and are looking for read something a little bit more serious. So I think that's what you're going to see more. And
that's
as
good.
A corollary, sorry if I'm going on a little while, there's actually a second change that's happening in the market, and it has been happening for a while, that has nothing to do with genre. It has to do with format. So there are two primary formats that are published in Japan for light novels. There's the bunko and the tankobon. So the bunko is the small, little-sized book that maybe I'm sure you guys are familiar with, but if your audience, it's like a little mini paperback almost. And then there's the tankobon, which is more like a manga size. And what's happened over many years is that, and accelerated recently, is that many, many, many more books are being published in the larger tankobon size, which is higher quality paper, and most importantly, maybe is also priced almost twice as much as the bunko size. The bunkos are usually like 600 yen, and the tankobons are 1,000 or 1,200 yen. So that change has been going over the past number of years, and it's accelerating. Many of the publishers are now, for example, as a specific example, Kodansha had a light novel line, Kodansha Bunko, but they're now mostly focusing actually on their Kodansha novels line, and pretty soon, actually this month, they're launching a Legend novels line, which is all going to be tankobon large size publications. So they're really shifting the way they publish their novels into these larger, higher quality, higher priced formats. I think that is a very important development in Japan. I'm not exactly sure how it affects the companies like ours, but we'll see.
Now, do you think that's because, in terms of the stories that you're seeing being told in that format, do you think that's because they're intentionally thinking that they will appeal to, as you said, the people that were kids, got into light novels, now they're working, mid-20s, 30s, they have a higher disposable income, and so they're trying to write stories that will appeal to them because they're still light novel fans, and now they're trying to, because they have more money, they're like, hey, here's a nicer format for you.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. I think also the secondary factor is that many of these were originally web novels, and what the Japanese companies have found is that when you try and publish something that was originally a web novel, if you publish it in a bunko, people are less likely to rebuy it than if it's a nicer, larger format that they can collect. So
right.
So it's sort of a value. They need to differentiate the value more, as the bunkos are pretty small and they're not really they're just read them and forget them kind of level. I guess you could sort of compare them to the old mass market paperbacks.
Right. Okay, so it's more of appealing to the collector as well as the older audience. I see. Okay. Now, speaking of isekai and everything else, I did have somebody ask me, they were wondering, we know that isekai is typically, you have said, the best-selling, if we're going to talk genre, that J-Novel Club has, and I know How a Realist Hero is one of your top-selling titles you often say. But in terms of your titles that are not isekai, what's your best-selling non-isekai title?
That's an interesting question. I would say that well, I think the best-selling ones that non-isekai is it's questionable, but I think Infinite Dendrogram and The Faraway Paladin are both about the same. Now, both of those are isekai adjacent. The Faraway Paladin is a reincarnation story, but it only matters a little bit, I guess you could say. And Infinite Dendrogram is a full dive VR MMO story, also isekai adjacent. But I would say then the next best selling one after that is If It's For My Daughter, I'd even Defeat a Demon Lord, which is not isekai at all. It's just a fantasy story. So I would definitely say that the best sellers are pure fantasy.
All right. And so then I know that you were saying in terms of deciding which titles you're going to license, you look at fan feedback and everything else. Do you ever take into consideration, and I know this was a little bit of a controversy online, do you take into consideration fan translations, like how much is done, how much is not done, how much people are doing it because it shows there's demand? Do you ever consider that?
Yes, it's very important in my consideration. It's important for a number of reasons, but it's not like a simple decision. There are many factors, not just does it have a fan translation or not. Like, for example, what is the quality of the fan translation? How often does the fan translation update? Is there an active community reading the fan translation? Are there multiple groups doing a fan translation? Is the fan translator locking new chapters behind some kind of Patreon paywall or demanding donations? Is there is the fan translation any good at all? Is it a machine translation? Is it edited, even remotely competently? How far along are they, et cetera, et cetera? How different is the web novel that they're translating, presumably if they're translating off the web novel versus the light novel that we might be licensing? Those are all parts of the consideration and all parts of the factors that I consider. Sometimes even I haven't really done this except for maybe one occasion, but I've even contacted the fan translators while I was still deciding whether to license a novel and seeing how their reaction would be to me licensing it. So those are all factors.
Okay. Huh. Well, okay. That's interesting to know. Now, Tom, did you have anything you wanted to ask?
I guess if I had anything that I would want to ask, I guess it would be, since you have licensed Occultic 9, have you ever had any contact with Chiyomaru Shikura, the author of that?
Directly, no, but we have been in contact with mages.
Oh, that's really cool.
Well, I mean, it's not as cool because I worked with mages on a number of things myself, other projects, so I already had contacts there, actually.
Another question that somebody had was, now, of course, you announced at Anime Expo that you are going to start licensing manga, which is, I know a lot of people are quite excited by. But what they were wondering was, what is your approach to going to be to the manga? I know you obviously can't talk anything titles or anything like that, and I'm not asking that. But is there an idea that you have in terms of a niche that you can fill, or are you just kind of going after titles that you think will be popular based on the books you publish light novel wise? Like, can you share anything about your strategy in the whole manga market that you're approaching?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for asking as well, because the announcement at Anime X was a little low key, and I haven't really said much about it since then publicly. So I'd like to actually, talk about the progress and how things are going.
Awesome.
So if you
Good.
don't mind, since we announced at Anime Expo, we've started doing the back end work and the front end work to create a manga reader that will integrate both into our website and our app. We now have the back end almost done. Manga readers, of course, require a sort of run your own DRM kind of thing, so that people can't just download the images. So, that kind of thing is necessary to program, and thankfully, it's actually not that hard. And I think we'll have a pretty decent, maybe even industry leading reader by the time we're done. And secondly, licensing, of course, has also progressed, and we already have, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 13 manga titles, which we have concluded the licenses for, and another 6 or 7, which we are in the final stages of. So we've already actually begun work on many of those titles. Now, we're not going to be launching with 30 titles all at once. They will be, I assure you, they will be rolled out over a number of months for many reasons, but just for practical reasons.
Well, yeah.
And to answer maybe the question that a lot of people are wondering, what's our strategy, what's our genres that we're picking? It's a two-prong strategy. The one prong will be the manga adaptations of light novels that we are already doing. Which I think is the obvious thing. So,
Yeah.
You can look at, if you want to guess what, manga we might have already licensed, feel free to look at the ones that we already have the light novels for that have manga adaptations. Now, some of those, like, if you want, if it's For My Daughter, I'd Even Defeat a Demon Lord, are already being published by other companies like Seven Seas. So, that's well and good, but there are plenty of manga adaptations of things that nobody is licensed yet that we're going to pick up. As a second prong of the strategy, I am going to be licensing eclectic things. No, but not too eclectic, but primarily focused, I think, on seinen. And then we will also try and spread out to other genres that don't have other companies or labels that sort of are focused on those. So I'm not going to say anything beyond that, but I think a lot of the first titles that we'll license that are original are seinen or sort of quirky comedies, those sorts of things that I personally like, and I think our manga readers will really eat up. So not like super, super duper heavy drama or that kind of thing, but more interesting titles from the publishers that we already have relationships with. And in the future, I think what's sort of happened a little bit is there's been a bit of an isekai manga boom, actually, and we might actually license some manga, some isekai manga from other companies, and maybe for things we don't even have the original light novels for, but to see how they go. And if the manga does well, then we might go back and license the light novel too. So those are the strategies that we're going for. Now, in terms of business strategy, our manga will be essentially exactly like our light novel strategy. We will be uploading new chapters every week for our subscribers, and they will be able to read those chapters every week. And then when a volume is finished being translated, it will then get taken down off the service, and we will sell the novel, the full volume as an ebook, both on Kindle and Comixology and Bookwalker and as many other places that sell digital manga as we can place it. So that will basically be our strategy. Price points and everything, well, will still to be determined, though I think they won't be very different from the light novels, if different at all. And just to be clear, we are definitely thinking about doing some of the manga in print as well. Of course, that will depend on how things do. So we really are trying to mirror the strategy that we're doing for light novels for manga, but speaking personally, I understand that digital manga is actually a sort of harder sell than digital novels, and there's so much more licensed manga in bookstores anyway that I'm looking for the manga side of our business to be an additional bonus and benefit to the overall business, and maybe not be so hugely profitable on its own, but to provide a more broad service for our members.
Right. So now because when we were doing our podcast after Anime Expo, that was one of the things that we had wondered. And I know you commented on the actual YouTube video, but I mean, I don't know how many people actually saw that. So your idea at this point is that the manga is not an additional service. It is actually being wrapped up. So if you have a J Novel Club membership currently for light novels, you will also have access to the manga. That's correct?
Yes, that's correct. We were not going to be adding a new membership tier or anything. If you are a J Novel Club member or premium member at this point, you will be able to access and read all of the manga that we plan to publish. That will not change for the foreseeable future until maybe I can envision splitting off the services if we had a library of 100 titles or something, of manga, and if the manga services, it gets really, really huge and we're simul-publishing 20, 30, 40 titles there as well, then it might be reasonable to have some kind of split things off. We'll see. But I highly doubt it'll get that big very quickly at all. The plan is really to have it be a single service, and the only reason we would split it into two services would have to be some kind of drastic change on our business model, and I do not anticipate that.
Right. Okay, awesome.
I do have a question that kind of tie into the last one. Well, recently there was an announcement that your company had a deal with Crunchyroll. First question is, who approached who first for that deal? And second question is if any of your manga are gonna be not streamed but available on their service.
Those are two good questions. So for the first question, I actually sort of had a sort of subscription tie-up idea in the back of my mind from the very beginning of starting a J Novel Club. However, it was Elation actually that approached us about adding us into their Super Fan Pack service. So although, great minds think alike, I guess you could say. And to explain the service, and for those who haven't heard the news, sorry if this sounds like advertisement, but I feel some context is needed.
Oh no, go for it.
Crunchyroll has a number of service packs that or plans that you can purchase at this point, from the basic Crunchyroll, which I think is $7 a month, to Crunchyroll plus VRV, or Verve, I guess they pronounce it, which is $10 a month, or maybe it's 12. Don't quote me on that. And then they are adding this new service tier called the Super Fan Pack, which will be $14.95 a month, I think, either 95 or 99, and that will include both Crunchyroll, Verve, as well as a number of services, including J-Novel Club, as all part and parcel to the monthly subscription. So if you are already a subscriber to both Verve and Crunchyroll, and J-Novel Club, it will save you some money if you just subscribe to the Super Fan Pack, as long as you also use one of the other services. The other two services that are included in the Super Fan Pack is Aniuta, which is the Anisong streaming service that just opened up in the West, I think, just like 2 months ago. It's the Western side of the Japanese service, which has been a big hit and has hundreds of thousands of anime songs that you can stream anytime. And the other service that is included is called Utomix, which is it's a streaming game platform thing. It's not like live streaming. It's like you can download just a little bit of the game, and then it sort of streams the rest of it. So you have a library of a couple hundred, games from many different publishers that you can get up and play almost immediately anywhere on any PC with your subscription. So those two services are included, as well as J-Novel Club, and there are also discounts at Right Stuff, and I believe I forget the name of it, but a Japanese snack box crate type service that will also be included in the service, with more details to be provided soon. So this Super Fan Pack deal is currently in production. I am working on the integration right now. We should be ready. The plan is to have it launched in Q4. That's what was announced, and that is definitely, we're on track for that. And once that happens, then anybody who subscribes to the Super Fan Pack will be able to essentially, you can create a free account on J-Novel Club and then link your account on J-Novel Club to your Super Fan Pack account. And then once you do that, you will be able to use our service as if you were a normal member. And you will get all the benefits of a normal membership, so reading all the pre-pubs as we release them every week, as well as being able to buy a la carte credits for $7. And that's basically how the service will work. The strategy is very simple. Crunchyroll has more than 1 million subscribers, I think like 1.5 million or something at this point. I don't know the exact numbers. And with this Super Fan Pack, of course, Crunchyroll is going to want to encourage their users to subscribe to it because it makes them more money. And that means a whole lot of, frankly, free advertising for us, because everybody who is a Crunchyroll subscriber will probably get bombarded with ads for the Super Fan Pack, and how J-Novel Club is this awesome service that you'll want because you want to subscribe to Super Fan Pack. And hopefully that will teach a whole lot more people, especially anime fans, which is our probably one of our, if not the most important audience, that about J-Novel Club and how we exist and what we do, and if they're interested in light novels, that we're the place to go. And honestly, even if people don't decide that Super Fan Pack is what they, is the right way that they want to support, they will hear about us and then maybe either subscribe to us later or buy our eBooks, which is perfectly acceptable too, and that's a great way to advertise our actual novels. A secondary effect is that, of course, Crunchyroll and us now working together on this project means that hopefully we'll be able to do a lot of marketing together as well. So, for example, this season, they're streaming How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, and unfortunately, it's a little bit too early to do any serious cross marketing, but in the future, if they're streaming the anime version of one of the books that we're doing the original novels of, wouldn't it be great if they could help advertise the original books on their service, and then or specifically advertise that if you want to read the original books, you should subscribe to Super Fan Pack. But either way, there's lots of opportunities for cross marketing that should provide a really great push to our own subscriber levels and also ebook sales. So I think it's a win-win for both of us. They get a service that really hits their user base and what their user base is interested in, which is anime, manga, and light novels. And we get a whole, like, the largest basically site community of anime and manga fans of our potential audience to learn about us. So I think it's a really great deal.
Fantastic.
Can I ask, while we're on some new business, I was just going to ask you about the 2 new titles, which I'm going to look them up real quick. Apparently, it's my fault that my husband has the head of a beast, and My Next Life as a Villainess, All Routes Lead to Doom. So I was wondering if there's a conscious effort by J Novel Club to kind of reach out to a more shoujo-oriented or female-oriented, licenses. And also, do you think these 2 titles will appeal even more broadly to both male and female audience?
Sure, that's a great question. So, of course, when we first started J Novel Club, I heard a lot of voices that said, "Hey, we want more light novels for girls. What's with all this, what's with all this male shonen stuff? Come on!" And I hear those voices, and I understand that there is a vocal audience out there of people who like shoujo and otome titles, and I always and still, from the very beginning, plan to branch out into these areas in a careful way that doesn't cause too much risk for my business. And it's time, basically. Ichijinsha has a huge number of, that's the name of the publisher behind those 2 books, I should say. They have a very large number of great shoujo and otome-oriented titles. And now that Kodansha purchased them, so we have access to their titles easily, I immediately pounced on 2 titles, which I think are really going to be good, but not just good books, but are going to be good tests, honestly speaking, of how titles which are a little bit more female-oriented will do. Bakarina, as we like to call My Next Life as a Villainess, All Routes Lead to Doom, but everybody just calls her Bakarina because she's Katarina and a Baka. Anyway, that book is hilarious, and it has a huge fan base already in the West, thanks to illegal fan translations, honestly. And the manga also is really popular, and actually 7 Seas announced the manga just like 2 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah.
Or 1 week ago. Time doesn't fly. And by the way, we did collaborate on the title, so it will be the same title. We're releasing it under the same English title. Actually, it was funny. My original English title that I came up with was All Routes Lead to Doom, My Next Life as a Villainess. And then 7 Seas was like, "Isn't it better if you flip it around?" And I was like, "You're right." And so we changed that. Generally, but that's our second collaboration on English title, I should say. How Not to Summon a Demon Lord is also a collaborative English title between 7 Seas and J Novel Club. So we work together, ha ha ha, sort of. We argue about the English titles of How Not to Summon a Demon Lord for hours and on end on Skype is what we do. Eventually, I think though, actually, like with the English titles and a good English title can really help a series. Just a literal translation doesn't necessarily hurt a series, but if you have a good and memorable English title that is true to the nature of the series, it actually can be a real boost to the popularity, I feel. Anyway, back to the original question about shoujo. So Bakarina appeals to both guys and girls, but even though it's technically kind of a reverse harem, like, it's so hilarious you don't even care. It's just the antics that Bakarina gets up to. She's oblivious in some ways and smart in others. And for those of you who don't sort of understand the general plot, let me give you a very brief overview. But basically, Katarina is the daughter of a rich family, and then one day, and I think she's like 14 or 15, she hits her head really hard, and all of a sudden she remembers that she was reincarnated from a girl in Japan. And what she remembers, however, is that when she was in Japan, she played an otome game, and that was basically her life, except the character she is in this game is the villainess. And all she remembers is that every single ending to this game, the villainess was either exiled or executed or something even worse. And she all of a sudden goes like, "Oh crap, I gotta do something." And she just tries as hard as she possibly can to avoid her ultimate fate in this game that she now realizes she's reincarnated into. So it's really hilarious, and it's got plenty of volumes out in Japan, and the manga is also a hoot. So I really expect that to do well. I know that a lot of people were asking for it actually in requests, and I hope we do a good job. The other title, I believe it's like, apparently it's my fault that my husband has the head of a beast.
Yeah.
This is it's a complicated title. I agree. And we struggled actually for the English title for this one, but I think kind of like, I actually, it grew on me after a while, that this English title that we chose, because you just have to read it correctly. You have to go like, apparently it's my fault that my husband has the head of a beast. That's the way, that's my internal, my internal reading of it. Because it's sort of Victorian, I don't know. So there's a princess of a country, and she has a problem, which is that every time someone loses their temper, she all of a sudden sees them with like these horrible beastly heads. And instead of sort of witnessing that, she shuts herself away and tries not to see anybody because she's scared. But then one day she meets a prince, and this prince, no matter how much he loses his temper, he just has a normal head for her. And so she's like, I'm marrying this guy, and she does. But unfortunately, like, it turns out basically right after they get married that all of a sudden this prince, now everybody else in the kingdom sees him as having a head of a beast, and they all blame her for like stealing his magic. Or it's a soft fantasy, so there's magic and it's pseudo realistic. Anyway, it's a romance story and kind of a newlywed trouble story in a way. So it's cute and it's romantic and it's definitely otome, but it's also something where it's that sort of Beauty and the Beast kind of style story that I think appeals very much to the West. So we're trying it out. Also, it's only 2 volumes long, so it's not like a huge risk and a commitment for someone to dive in and just check it out. So hopefully that'll also appeal not just to girls, but to our still majority male audience. And, they can read something a little different than a change.
Now, sort of going along those lines of branching out into other genres and stuff like that, how do you, when you're licensing light novels, do you actually keep in mind in terms of risk factors? Or are you kind of like, okay, if I license 4 books that I know are going to sell awesome, I can afford to license one that maybe not so much? Like, do you ever sort of play those games in your head when you're licensing?
It's not that's not the calculation, because it's not a one-to-one thing, right? I mean, some books they might do. It's not like one book sells 0 and another sells 100,000 copies. All books sell on a sliding scale. So what I do is I look at our running cost. I look at our running revenue. One of the neat things about selling mostly ebooks, I would, it's not a surprise, but the majority of our revenue is from the ebook sales and not necessarily the subscription. However, the subscription, of course, is also a running revenue. So we earn revenue every day, and I can get a very solid estimate of just how much money we're going to make every day. And if I know how much money we're making every day, then I know how many novels we can translate at one point in time. As all of our translators work at approximately the same speed, and I know that we can handle, say, 25 books a month, or well, not that many, but we can handle 25 series at once, so that's like 12 books a month, and then I know how much that running cost will be in terms of our production. So there's a capacity, an overall capacity that J Novel Club has, and when I license something or choose something to license, depending on how many volumes it is, I know how much time, from this date to this date, or assuming the series is completed, or if it's not completed, open-ended into the future ad infinitum, I know how much money per month that series will cost us from a production standpoint. And I actually have a full spreadsheet schedule calculator that I've programmed, which I can put in our current series and how much they're costing us per month to produce, and then I can put in any prospective series that I'm thinking about licensing, with estimates about their Japanese publishing schedule rates and estimates about how many volumes there might be in the end, and come up with essentially a 90%, 70%, 50% probability curves about how far or how close are we going to be to our limit, how much buffer do I want to use, I want to have, etc. It's very scientific.
Well, I guess I shouldn't expect anything less from physics. In terms of your sales, so obviously J Novel Club is doing much better today than they were when you launched 2 years ago. At least I certainly hope so. How do you find in terms of just because in Japan, of course, there's tons of sales charts, and we know how light novels are performing in particular titles, and down to the copy of numbers sold. Just curiosity-wise, in terms of your sales overall, do you find that with a series, let's say, do you find a significant drop off from volume to volume, or is it like volume 1 sells a ton but volume 2 and onward sort of levels out? Or what's the sales sort of trend do you see with light novel series?
Sure. Well, first off, because these are ebooks, and unlike physical books where there's only like a small slice of them in the stores at any one point in time, and then after that they're sort of not on the shelves, ebooks are always on the shelf, shall we say. And so, you can only look at this in terms of a particular snapshot in time. And there are some series that have been out for a long time and have many, many volumes, so we can sort of understand, we can get a decent steady state picture and assume that the percentages aren't going to change very much. But it's definitely the case where, if you're talking about a series that's been out for 6 months versus a series that's been out for 2, 3, 4 years, which we don't even have data for yet, I think that the answer might change a little bit. There is a significant drop-off between Volume 1 and Volume 2, a less significant drop-off between Volume 2 and Volume 3, and it starts to level off around Volume 4. And then, of course, there's the later volumes always sell less than the earlier volumes. However, that is mostly just due to the fact that they've been on sale for a shorter amount of time. So there's always a 2-month gap. If you correct for that and do some estimates about, further sales over time and trying to rectify the time lag on the volume sales, which you can do with relatively good accuracy with appropriate simulation, you find that the sales drop-off almost actually completely ceases around Volume 4. There's actually some exceptions to that. We found that the sales totals for Grimgar from Volume 5 actually were higher than Volume 4 and 3, and that is because of the fan translation, which stopped at Volume 4.
Okay. All right. So that's another factor that fan translations can kind of play into things too.
I think actually that's the first and only evidence, actual hard numerical evidence, that fan translation has affected sales. I seen absolutely no other explanation for why Volume 5 of Grimgar sold more than Volume 4.
Now, did those sales then continue from 5? Like it kind of had leveled out at that point?
Yeah, I mean, we continue to see the very, very minor drop off after 5, but like I said, after correcting for time lag, it's pretty much level. It's also theoretically possible that the print announcement had something to do with it, but I don't think so.
Right. Now, do you find? Of course. So you've had 2 anime. Just recently, we've had Master of Ragnarok and How Not to Summon a Demon Lord. And just based on the fan community reaction, obviously one title was far more popular than the other. What kind of influence did you see in terms of, if you can discuss it, what kind of influence did you see in terms of the sales? Like when these series first premiered, did you see a boost to both of them? And then as the, fan reaction to them over time, did you see fluctuations? I'm just curious what kind of effect you see anime having on their title sales there.
Let me answer the question in general first, and then I'll get to the specific series. So when an anime airs for a series, there are a couple of things that are really important. One is that we already have a number of volumes that have been published. If that's the case, then during the run-up to the anime starting, you see a little bit of a ramp-up. And then when the first episode of the actual anime hits, we see a multiple of anywhere between 2 to 4 times normal sales. And that continues for a couple weeks. And then slowly drops off until the end of the series. And then when the series ends, it peaks up again as people are like, oh, hey, it's the end of the series. I want to read more. And so then they go out and seek out the light novels. This is sort of all obvious. Now for the 2 series, that happened with smartphone, and that will also happen, and also happened with both How Not to Summon a Demon Lord and the Master of Ragnarok. The Master of Ragnarok's, however, reaction to the anime and just the overall streaming numbers actually meant that multiplicative effect was far less than what happened for How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, and the decay happened far sooner. The second thing that actually happens is that even after the anime is over, and then there's that final boost after the anime is over, it maintains maybe about somewhere between 50% and 100% increase of what I call tail sales. So if there's not a new volume out, just sort of how many sales the series gets every day on average, that will usually be boosted anywhere between 50 and 100% from the tail sales prior to the anime airing. And I think that's simply because of the much higher number of sort of links and Google hits, and just the name of the series is out there on the internet much more, so people are generally more aware of it, and the number of tail sales we get is directly proportional to the total number of people aware of the existence of a series. I think we could, if I had some way to actually get that number, I could probably actually get an exact proportion, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's how the trickle sales work. So yes, Master of Ragnarok's anime performance definitely affected the amount of increase in sales that we saw during the anime. And at this point in time, actually, I'd say that the effect of the anime has kind of pretty much fizzled out, and it's selling about as well as it did beforehand, which is actually not bad. It sells pretty well. It's always been the right on the genre, and the books have always had a good reputation. So I think that it'll continue to do well for us throughout its run.
Yeah, I own one of the books, and I don't own many eBooks.
Well, I mean, I think again, I guess that's possibly what you're seeing community-wise in terms of people latch onto a book, and even if the anime is subpar, you still have that fandom that realizes that that's the anime's fault and not the book's fault, right?
Yeah, I don't think there are many people who are going to be like, well, I really enjoyed this series, but the anime sucked, so I'm not going to read it anymore. I mean, you'd have to be pretty damn shallow for me to think of that.
Well, fair enough. So now, how do you even manage your time though? Like, I mean, you're licensing titles now, like, because how much of a one-man show are you? I know that you, of course, have translators and editors, but I mean, you're working on the website. I'm assuming you're the lead on the licensing. You're in terms of being on Curious Cat, Twitter, and everything else, that's all you as well, right?
Oh, you know nothing. No, yeah, let me explain. First off, when we started, it was pretty much just me and a group of translators and editors who I had known already for years as working together with them for localization. I basically used my connections to start negotiating for licenses. Now these days, there are more people in the team. I have a full-time, publisher, although I guess you can call her editor-in-chief, Amy Zink, who her primary duties are just making sure that things get localized and up on the website when they should be, and also in producing the final EPUBs, and then I do the final checks and things on and the final uploading for Amazon and a couple of things like that. And the website and the apps, I have 2 developers now who are working on the manga, and then another part-time developer who helped out with the brand new version of the app that we finally launched just earlier this week. And I still do the most of the programming of things on the website, although of course it's pretty obvious that I don't work on that too much. And I do all the marketing myself effectively. We have a person that helps with press release, sending out the press releases, but that's a very small job because we don't really send out that many press releases. I kind of wish we would do more with the newsletter, and we will. Just got to sort of work up a marketing team at some point. But let me transition into what your question is kind of getting towards, which is how is J Novel Club going to grow if it's really just me doing everything? And that's a very good question. So So in 2019, those of you who are really, really into J Novel Club lore might have heard rumors that I am actually moving back to the United States at the end of the year, and that is a good thing for the company and for myself, I think. Basically, I won't get into the detailed reasons for me moving back, but let's just say that it has to do with how well we're doing as a company, and so part of moving back will, of course, make it a little bit harder for me to talk with my Japanese licensing partners all the time. But trust me, I plan to be back in Japan all the time. But on the flip side, what it's going to enable me to do is to make J Novel Club a much more real business in the sense. So, first order of business is start to hire some full-time employees, which is happening this week and will be happening over the next course of the next year, and that will mean things like assistants and some secretaries to handle the scheduling. Furthermore, I fully plan to hire at least a half-time marketing person, which will help do things like the newsletter and maybe do more on Twitter and Facebook that we don't really do anything other than my occasional retweets of your announcements. Thank you, Justice. And there's many other things that I think that as a business we could start stabilizing. So of course, with the whole print and manga side of things being started, we're going to definitely need another person that handles the manga side and the scheduling and creation and the managing of that, because that's going to maybe not double, but add another 25-30% just to our number of projects that we're doing at once. And so I'm going to need project manager, which Amy will essentially manage as like the head project manager as well as head editor, and that's sort of the structure I'm looking for. So in 2019, I fully intend to increase the company to 3 to 4 actual employees, in addition to the over 50 freelancers, translators, editors, quality checkers that we already employ to handle all of our books.
All right, fantastic. Wow. Okay. Here, I was just thinking you were going to share your secrets about what pills you take to keep awake all the time, but wow.
Well, I mean, if you want more information about how I am handling everything now, let me just say that I just had the movers come to give an estimate for my move back to the United States, and in order to do that, I had to clean my apartment, and I realized like there are some things that I found that I haven't really cleaned my apartment since I even started the company like 2 years ago, and so it was about there have been sacrifices. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, fair. I bet. So now, does that mean, because this year was the first time that you had a presence at a couple of conventions over on North American soil? You were at Anime Expo, Otakuthon, and there was one other, was there not, that you were at, or
I
am I
was at
wrong?
Crunchyroll Expo for the announcement of the Super Fan Pack.
Right. Okay. Yes. Crunchyroll Expo, of course. So now, does that mean we're going to see you perhaps at more conventions now?
Yeah, I mean, now I haven't gone into my ultimate convention strategy or anything. However, obviously, me being back in the United States is going to mean that it will be a lot easier for me to participate in conventions. It's not. I mean, honestly speaking, as a company that's primarily a digital publisher, although I guess we're going to be getting into print enough, maybe it will be worthwhile. But participating in cons and companies like Funimation and other companies like that, or Sentai or Yen Press, or those companies have physical goods to sell, and so it's profitable for them to go to conventions.
Fair.
But if we're still primarily a digital book company, it's difficult to sell ebooks at a convention, and it's really just purely marketing. So, although I definitely like to go and do tons of conventions, my time is precious, and we don't really have like that much staff. So it's going to be something where we're going to be selective and do the top cons if we can, but maybe only 3 or 4 a year maximum, and then we're going to sort of see where it goes from there. Of course, any conventions listening, if you'd like to invite me as a guest and pay for my plane ticket, please contact me.
Well, I'll try and put in a good word for you for any of the ones that I know of, so we'll see what we can do there. Uh, Gentlemen, do any of the rest of you have questions at this point?
Sure. So I was going to ask, you kind of touched on settings that you like or genre you like. What about characters? What kind of characters do you like in the light novels that are already out? I know for me, like, there's certain characters that I kind of look for, like Yuichi Sakaki from My Big Sister Lives in a Fantasy World, or Sui Mei. I don't know how you pronounce his name from the new series. The magic in this other world is too far behind. Sort of characters that maybe surprise you, or they have some kind of element that kind of is a little bit of a twist on genre or on like personalities. What kind of characters do you like in the J novel works that have come out so far?
Well, I am a bit of a mad scientist, I guess you could say, and I definitely love the twisted mad scientist type characters like in Infinite Dendrogram, Dr. Franklin.
Yeah.
You know, he's he's a terrible, homicidal, crazy antagonist, but I love him. He's got the look. Anyway, and and also I have a real soft spot for I really do like the cute child characters. They make me all feel all fuzzy. So whether it's the girl, I think her name is like now I'm gonna get pilloried, but in Arifureta, I think they're like Meru. No, that's the name of the same race. That's her mother's name, I think. But the little mer lady girl, and then also, of course, Latina from If It's For My Daughter, the younger version. I even defeat a demon lord. I mean, those characters really get at me because I think it's my midlife crisis. Instead of having a family, I have a light novel company with has little children for me to care about.
Now, you've been pretty active in it seems like you're active in the fan community, obviously, as much as your time allows. I mean, you've done Reddits, you're here talking us to today, which is awesome. I'm just wondering, like, and one of the things that I know with my own projects related to light novels, trying to expand the light novel community, how do you find the community around light novels, and are you seeing that community grow? Are you seeing the awareness of light novels grow? Like, how do things look on your side of things?
I think it's undeniable that the community of light novel readers is growing, and a great evidence for that is our sales, actually, and then the subscribers and our subscribers, which have been growing almost linearly since we started with no advertisement. So, I don't think it's just that there have been 30,000 light novel fans from 2 years ago, and they're just slowly subscribing to us. I think that it's also a very major factor is that there is a growing pool of light novel readers that are interested in light novels and then might think about subscribing to us. And that is due to many factors, but I think it's due to the greater number of light novels that are being published by companies like us and Seven Seas and Yen Press. It's due to a greater number of news stories about light novels and light novels that are, anime that's being based off light novels, like ReZero and other really popular shows like Konosuba's new season, all things like that. It started many years ago, but it's continuing and it's continuing to grow. I would even estimate that the light novel, the size of light novel, people interested in light novels, it must have grown by somewhere between 50% to 100% over the past year. I think it's very much grown compared to, and it's still growing at a rapid pace because there's a huge audience of anime fans and slightly smaller, but maybe if you look at the entire world, larger audience for manga fans. And those people are obviously, they're getting older and they're maybe getting bored with some of the things that are offered in that medium, and they're super prime suspects for being exposed to and interested in light novels. So I think that basically it is growing, and it's growing organically, and it's growing because people are enjoying the content and talking about the content to other people. I've seen so many tweets where it's just like, hey, what's that from? Or, oh, it's from this thing. It's a light novel. What's a light novel? Or where can I read them? And then they post a link to a pirate site, and I get sad. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter, because even if your first exposure to light novels is some torrent on a torrent site, you read it and you go, hey, this is enjoyable. This is fun. Maybe this is something that I could get into. And then you search out more. You seek out more of it. And when the crucial thing and the difference why I think it took a long time for the light novel audience to grow like it's growing now is that you get people hooked with something, and then they go and they seek out more. If that more doesn't exist, then that's where it ends and they stop. But if now that more and more light novels are being published and they're so more accessible, and there's places to go to read them online legally like ours, or easily accessible on ebook stores like BookWalk or Amazon, when people get excited about a series that maybe had an anime, they can now easily go out and consume the content in the light novel medium, and that basically enables them to grow the fandom. So it's sort of like growing a plant. You can plant the seed in the ground, which is like the anime adaptation, right? But if the soil isn't already fertilized, if it doesn't have the nutrients in it, then nothing's going to grow. So, but now finally, because of companies like ours, the ground is fertile, and more and more light novel fans are sprouting up.
Right.
I have a question. It's actually from Tom. His environment's a little loud right now. So he was wondering, how did your partnership with Seven Seas happen? Sort of along the same lines of JL's question earlier. How did the partnership with Seven Seas happen? Who approached whom?
Well, this is going to sound like boring, is very boring, but in very early on, I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could do print? And then I also thought to myself, no way we can do print. That costs way too much money. I don't have this kind of money. Our cash flow is going to destroy us. And so I thought to myself, hey, there are companies like Seven Seas, etc., which of course have many experience doing print. Maybe they'd be curious about working with us. So I went to Seven Seas website, and they had a contact form. And I put in the contact form, hey, my name is Sam Pinansky. I'm head of J Novel Club. We just started like 3 months ago. Would you like to talk? And they got back to me like a month later, but they got back to me. And actually, I remember the first call we had, I was actually at my parents' house for Thanksgiving in 2016. And so this was only like 2.5 or 2 months or so after we launched. We hadn't even put out our very first ebook yet. And that was when I had a call with Jason, the president of Seven Seas, as well as Adam, the chief editor. And we had a long talk, and I introduced myself and explained about where I was coming from and my plans for the business. And I think basically he was very skeptical, of course, because who's this guy? But once he heard my background and where I was coming from, and had seen, by the way, already the positive reaction to the books that the prepubs that we've been putting out, he immediately sort of thought to himself, hey, this is maybe we should do a deal. And it took a couple of months to work out the kinks, and for me to go back to Japan and sublicense the print rights that we didn't have yet, so that I could sublicense them to Seven Seas. But it worked it out, and I think Seven Seas is a really good company and very flexible, and I'm really glad that they are our print partners for the titles that they're doing.
Because you have this existing relationship with publishers, I mean, I don't know how the whole anime production thing works, but do you have publishers now that you have a good enough relationship that they're kind of like, hey, Sam, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, maybe you might want to publish this book? Do you have that relationship with them now, or have you just gotten ridiculously lucky that the titles you've gone after, you've had quite a number get anime after you've already licensed them and released a couple of volumes?
Well, ask yourself, do you really think I would have licensed the 18-volume series called The Master of Ragnarok and Blessers of Ahanjar, and that other series, which shall not be named, which also had an anime planned, without that knowledge?
Well, I don't, necessarily think so. but I just, thought I'd get it right direct from the source.
Yes, obviously the licensors will hint at things. They'll make recommendations. Uh, it depends very much on the actual status of the Japanese publisher within the anime production committee, whether they are even allowed to tell us officially about such things. So it varies depending on the project and products. And actually, to expand on your question, we have been asked for sales numbers. We have been asked to describe the popularity of series in the West in order for Japanese publishers to create pitches to production companies.
Oh, okay.
So
that's really interesting. We've had discussions before about how anime has become much more of a global awareness and how anime productions have become much more globally aware. And I wondered about that. So that is incredibly interesting. So sometimes it can go the other way as well. And I'm guessing if they're having that conversation with you, they're probably having those similar conversations with, say, a Seven Seas or Yen Press or what have you.
well, actually, maybe not, because Seven Seas and Yen Press and many of the other companies license through agents. And whether or not the publishers feel comfortable going directly to the and trying to get, also other companies are not necessarily going to give the data that we give because I am extremely dumb. And and I'm like, here's our data. But, no, because I understand, like, the more data sharing we do, the more control we have over the content. But other companies, the default for many companies is don't give data, don't tell them anything, except for what's legally required in your royalty reports, etc. And but we share data. Other companies, whether they share the data or whether the Japanese publishers feel comfortable enough with them, because if they don't talk to them directly, right? They're just going through agents. I'm not sure necessarily, there's that sort of comfort level. There's a variety of ranges of comfort levels between the publishers and the licensors and the publishers. Me being here in Japan, meeting with them in person all the time, inviting them out for ice cream, it's very important. But I should also say that it's not just actually English. Like, there's a very, very, very high growth in light novel sales in Asia, and Asian countries like China and South Asia, like Taiwan and other countries like there. I know for a fact that a light novel is getting an anime, and it's not because of our sales. It's because of the sales in Asia. So, I'm not going to complain, but then there's other shows then there's other books that will be getting anime, which frankly are due in part to the sales that we're having, and I can't say which ones. We'll find out. I think like of 3 or 4 at this point. And now these are all in various stages of production, some of which are not even they're talking not even finalized. So don't quote me on the number. Or eventually, I suppose we'll have 3 or 4 that get an anime, so I can never be wrong. But anyway, but you know what I'm saying. It's never done and done until let's just say that it starts airing on TV because of what certain things happened. So I think that the cooperation between companies like ours and the Japanese production companies, which is similar to, if not the same as cooperation between us and the anime production committees, is a super important factor that I really hope to continue to improve over the years, and sort of not necessarily to influence like the authors, because of course in the light novels it's not like we're not going to go and complain about the editor about what's going to be in the next chapter, but maybe to influence the type of books that get published, the type of proposals that get accepted by editorial departments, all those things, and our sales really can and maybe should start affecting the Japanese side of things a little bit.
Wow, that's okay. Wow. Man, this is turning into a great and very informative podcast. I love it.
What, you thought I was just going to sit here and describe our books and be like, buy this now, it's available for sale? Nobody wants that.
Well, I mean, it's not like we don't say, hey, these awesome light novels, buy them now. We already do that, so it's all good. Now, so you know what? I want to, because we're talking about influence of Asian countries and stuff like that. I guess you can't really talk much about New Life Plus, whether that's ever going to continue or not.
I can't say anything about the sort of the future of that title because I don't really know. To be fully honest, the situation is really unfortunate, I think, on all sides. I know that Hobby Japan and really hopes that they can continue the series in some manner. Not, it's public information, but even though they're the bookstores, I actually recently was in a bookstore and just was curious. So I was like, hey, do you have a copy of New Life Plus you could sell me? And they were like, no. And I'm like, okay. I was curious whether maybe they had it under the counter or something. But the ebooks are still available for sale, so you can still buy the ebooks in Japan. So it's not like it's been struck from the the history books or something, which would be ironic. Anyway, but in terms of it continuing in Japan or in print or the print getting reissued, I really have no idea what's going on. I think a lot of it actually, this is purely speculation, but I think it has to do with the author and the author needing to find the appropriate time to continue, or whether he even feels like it's appropriate to continue. The author has another series which he is continuing, so it's not like the author is not working anymore or anything, and maybe the author has decided that it is best for his own career not to continue it, and maybe I think Hobby Japan would continue it, and maybe reissue volume 1 with correction, well, shall we say edits, to remove the offensive bits from it, because if you're really just looking at the content of the novel, there are problematic portions in the very beginning of volume 1, but there really isn't anything beyond that, at least that anybody's been able to identify. And I do think it is a bit of a slippery slope to start looking at the past statements, offensive statements of authors in terms of publishing their books. There's, if you go down that aisle, if you go down that path, then there's many light novel authors out there who have said things in the past, and maybe even not so far in the past, which you might vehemently disagree with politically, for example. And as soon as you start doing that and not looking at the work itself that's being published as the primary barometer, then you get into dangerous territory. But of course, there's exceptions to that in terms of actual hate speech, which even though this was in the past and the author did apologize for it, there's questions maybe about that. And I think what really tipped it off was the fact that it got into the work, and that is sort of over the line for too many people, and that's what really happened here. So authors out there thinking about putting in coded messages to your politically extreme friends out there on the internet, don't do it. Just don't do it.
Save your projects. Don't do it. Sounds good. Awesome. All right. Well, you know what? I can't believe I've actually asked you just about everything that I had planned. That's wow. Jean-Luc, I know, unfortunately, Tom's kind of out of commission, apparently.
Yeah.
Terrence, Jean-Luc, do you guys have anything you want to add?
Well, I had one last question. Last podcast, we talked about anime that were gonna air that are based on light novel, and there's a question that we didn't, we weren't able to answer, and maybe Sam, with your background, you maybe might know the answer or maybe a part of it. So when they, let's take a certain light novel, for example, like no title in particular, like when they decide there's going to be an anime, how do they go around to choosing if it's gonna be like a 13 episode or like Sword Art Online is gonna be 50 episode long? Like, how do they decide this? Like, do they look at the sales of the light novel, or just they go about like more of an artistic decision? Is there an answer you can enlighten us for that?
Sure. I think that the process of getting anime made is important to keep in mind here. A publisher is not going to provide the primary funds, even the majority of the funds to make an anime. At least that's not how it has been for many years. They're maybe going to provide 10, 15, 20%. The majority is going to be from the distributor, the Blu-ray distributor, the like a Bandai or someone like that, which is going to provide them primary funding for it, or like an Aniplex. And those companies really are the ones that dictate how many episodes it's going to be, because they're the ones who are providing the primary funding. The publishing company and the author are more told how many episodes it will be, and then they have to figure out how to adapt it into so many episodes. Now, the decision on how many episodes it's going to be is determined pretty much exclusively, I would say, by the sales numbers they can expect from it. Now, and that by the sales numbers, I mean still disc sales, and then also at this point in time, overseas streaming rights sales is a very significant factor, especially Chinese, and to a lesser extent Western. But honestly, China is the one who still pays the most for streaming rights. Of course, that tends to change by the hour depending on the regulations over there. So Blu-ray is still, and packages and all, other types of sales like figures and such are still super, super crucial for how many episodes an anime is going to be. So I think I would not be wrong to say that unless there is some other extenuating factor, it will be one core. So 10, 12, 11, 12, 13 episodes max. The only reason an adaptation would be more than one core is if the sales of light novels were so exemplary that they can use that to predict a certain number of DVD or Blu-ray sales, that they know that they can support it for that long, and therefore a Bandai or an Aniplex will put in the $7-8 million instead of the $3-4 million to produce the anime. That is so. For example, I think Reincarnated as a Slime was announced for 26 episodes, right? Am I crazy?
Oh, I couldn't hear you.
I'm just wondering.
Just the last bit. Yep.
So maybe I'm misremembering, but I think one of the new, or was it Goblin Slayer, was the 26 episode one. Anyway, one of the very popular light novel series is getting 2 cores, and right off the bat, and that is only possible because of the sales of the light novel being good enough where they know that they're going to sell a bunch of discs. But for anything else, unless you're like literally the top 5, 6 light novels of the day, you're not going to get more than 13 episodes anime at first. Then it's always possible, depending on the success of the anime and the sales of the Blu-rays in Japan, I should say, that a second season could be produced in the future. So, here's hoping for another season of How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, which I think did really well. That would be great. I would be very pleased about that. But there are no plans at the moment because, when that started, it was a big popular selling title for Kodansha, but it wasn't huge as a light novel. I mean, it was one of their most popular titles, but compared to the other big boys in the room, like from Kadokawa, it still didn't sell nearly enough to get 2 cores off the bat.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the uncensored DVD sales will do well, though. So just, on the anime vein, because this was Jean-Luc's right, the podcast that should be going live probably tomorrow, we were talking about anime coming up, and one of the things we were talking about was how it seems that there isn't as much of a push anymore for anime based on light novels to tell a complete story. Like they'll cover an arc, but they seem to have a less of a problem leaving it open-ended, as in go find the light novel if you want to know more, than they did say 15 years ago. Who makes that decision, like in terms of how much the anime is going to cover? Like, because we see it vary, right? That some series cover only one volume, some series will shove 5 volumes into a core. Like, who kind of, do you know, have any idea who makes those decisions?
Well, I don't, but it turns out that that exact same question was asked to one of our guests for Anime Expo, Harada-san, Naoki Harada, who is the head editor of Overlap, and he answered this question. And so I will just copy his answer because it was very illuminating.
Okay.
Basically, that is a decision made by the head producer, the head editor at the publisher, the author to some extent, and maybe the director if the director has been decided already. It depends on who starts the production committee and at what point in the process the anime head director is chosen. But almost always it's the head producer and the head editor at the publishing company that decides. So at the point in time in which they are making this decision, they sort of already know how many episodes is going to be because they know how much money they can basically raise from their production. So they know, okay, it's going to be 12 episodes or 13 episodes or 12 plus an OVA or something. And then they sit down and they look at the books that they have and they go, well, how are we going to deal with this? And there are many the questions are many about how you adapt things, because there are many light novel series where the first volume is just setup. And then if you do that, well, how are you going to hook people on the first episode, right? The way anime airs, it's 13 separate little stories, but, one volume isn't one episode, unless you're talking about Master of Ragnarok. And so it's difficult to adapt. In fact, it's much harder to adapt in many ways than manga, because manga, as already a visual medium and already serialized as a primary distribution, the stories are split up in manga more so than in light novels because of the way it's already produced. But light novels, at least the ones that aren't based on web novels, their initial, they're put out in 400, 350 page chunks. So it's a bigger lift to adapt them into 13 30-minute episodes.
Right. Huh. All right, cool.
I have one more question. It's actually from Tom. He's still kind of struggling with some connection issues. So his last question was, how did licensing go for smartphone? Was it your ideas or the publisher's idea? How early into J Novel Club did you say, I want to license this? He said it's kind of interesting because he actually wanted smartphone for a while before you announced it, and he wanted to hear about it. Did it have a pretty big fan translation or something?
Okay, sure. I'm going to be brutally honest. Hobby Japan came to us because of the anime, and they said, hey, we have a crazy request. Could you license this and put out 4 volumes before the July? I think it aired in the summer, right? So July. Yeah. And I went, and I think at that point it was December is when they first approached me. And I was like, omakase. I think I literally said that in Japanese because, we're talking Japanese. Actually, the first thing I did is I went out and I found a translator crazy enough to actually agree to such a plan. And I did, thankfully. Well, he had already contacted me and I knew he was crazy. So I was like, hey, you want to do this? And he was like, omakase. Anyway, and it worked out. The first thing, though, when they first came to me with this proposal, I wasn't just like, yes, give it to me. I was like, all right, let me make a plan, because I don't know if it's come across on this podcast, but I like to plan things. And I like to, think about, the actual details. And so I immediately went to Akihabara and I bought the first book. And I sat down and I read through, I think it was through the battle with the first crystal phase. And I just had a smile on my face the whole time. It was just such a fun, stupid little read, and I went, well, you know what, this is fine. And that's actually what Hobby Japan had told me. They was like, it's very honobono isekai fantasy. It's very light. Everybody likes it because it's happy, and I'm like, yeah, you know what, let's do that. I think, and already by that point in time, it had only been, I guess, 6 months or so since we really started, maybe even less. It was clear to me what was popular. It was like, hey, people really like Realist Hero. People really like the happy stories, the lighthearted ones. And so, this hits what our readers want. And then I found the production to do it fast enough. And of course, it was getting an anime. So I said, we're doing it. And that's really where it came from. So was I aware of it beforehand? Minorly. I had already looked through all of Hobby Japan's catalog, but it didn't pop out at me, honestly. It was too that I didn't look past the title. I'll admit that. Like, I thought the title. I read the title and I went, nobody's going to read this. It sounds stupid. and to some extent, actually, like there was a bit of that. But then the anime came out and people were like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. It's stupid, but I like it. And so, that, the anime helped sort of dissuade people. Now are aware of the series and they know what they're getting into, and people like it. And that's what's most important about it. Now in terms of your second half of the question, about the fan translation, I was not, I mean, I knew that the web novel was being translated, but when I looked into the group that was doing it, I was like, it's machine translated, re-edited garbage. And I didn't really think it was much of a factor.
All right. Cool. All right. Anybody else got any other questions for Sam while we have him captive?
Well, actually, oh, okay. You go ahead, Terrence.
No, it's nothing. It's nothing major, and it might be something you could cut from the podcast if you want, Justice. I was going to ask something selfish, which was about the app. I was going to ask if, and this might be in the same vein of, you said, you don't like having like image capture or anything like that in the app. I was wondering about text to speech support, if that would be something you would ever look into in the app, to offer, a text-to-speech, ability for reading your EPUBs out loud.
Terrence, have you downloaded the latest version yet? The new version I just put out?
Is there text-to-speech support?
No.
I have the latest. I thought I had the latest version, but I haven't checked it out yet. What's going on with it?
It came out just like 2 days ago, so make sure you update if you haven't. But it doesn't have text-to-speech. But what it does have is what we call simple mode. And simple mode does not do pagination, and it just lays the text out all in one big scroll. And that should make the built-in text-to-speech functionality that phones have just be able to read the whole thing at once.
Okay. All right.
So I know that some people have been used it for text-to-speech with the built-in sort of the built-in text-to-speech accessibility commands that iPhones and Androids have. But because things are split up per page, it would only like read one page at a time, and it was a pain in the butt to do. So a secondary reason why we added this quote simple mode is because it should make it easier for the built-in text-to-speech to read the whole thing.
All right, I'll have to test it out.
Yeah, you can let us know how it went on the next one.
Yeah.
We're definitely, I think the next app version is going to be the big, there's going to be a new app version that adds in the manga, but after that, we're going to do a major rewrite that'll rewrite the whole thing from scratch. I'm pretty sure. My crappy code needs a rewrite. Actually, I do have a semi-announcement for your podcast, though. That it leaked a little bit. If you're in our Discord, a little plug for our Discord. If you're interested in joining, but I can't say a link, so no, just find one online. But some very eagle-eyed people have already noticed this. But I actually have announcements of 2 new series that we will be doing in print. So already in February, we announced that February 5th, we'll be releasing both In Another World with My Smartphone and How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, Volumes 1 and 2 on February 5th. But then on April 2nd, so 2 months later, we will not only be releasing the third volume of both those series, but we will also be releasing, if it's for my daughter, I'd even defeat a demon lord, volumes 1 and 2.
Excellent.
And the magic in this other world is too far behind, volumes 1 and 2. So those are two more series that we are doing in print. I might add that the magic in this other world is the first series in print that we are doing from Overlap. So now that's 3 publishers that we are publishing print versions of: Hobby Japan, Overlap, and Kodansha. So hopefully those people are excited about that and will be on the lookout for the print editions for those. I think actually both of them have really beautiful covers and compelling stories. And in The Magic in This Other World is Too Far Behind is it just sells really, really well. And I think that's a good example of the slightly smarter isekai that people are very into. So hopefully those will do well. And we'll have more announcements for more titles that we'll be doing in print over the coming months as we slowly ramp this stuff up. I'm hoping to publish in print somewhere between 30 and 40 volumes next year. We'll see if we actually get that far.
So okay, so you're dropping volumes 1 and 2 of each of your premier titles at the same time, just to try and catch up a little bit. That I did not know.
Yep, we are, and now we're not necessarily going to keep up that pace. We're going to do the third volume just 2 months later. And then it'll be one volume after that every 2 months, I think. I don't want to predict our schedule yet. We're still working it out, and of course it's brand new, and I'm talking with the distributors. I will say this, however, Barnes & Noble has already ordered a very significant amount of our books. So
awesome, cool.
I'm happy.
How about Indigo and Canada? Come on.
Indigo is
I'll have to go and request.
That's where I buy my books. So
yeah, Indigo is a major buyer from Ingram, our distributor, and I don't have the number that they bought, but I think they have actually bought some already. I'll have to check. Actually, I'm not really going to get official numbers for another couple weeks because we're still getting integrated into the online reporting system. But but Ingram has told me a couple of numbers that they're seeing, so things are looking good.
Excellent. That's fantastic. And so you'll be doing, I guess because it's a traditional publishing North American style, you'll basically be dropping all of your print titles around the same time per month, as opposed to what you're able to do with eBooks, where you kind of release a title every couple of days. Is that kind of what the model you're looking at?
Yep, first Tuesday of the month will be J Novel Club Day.
All right, fantastic. Mark it on your calendars, people. Starting in, you said February, right?
Yep, February 5th will be our first release date. Now, I will actually have some of the physical books probably even before the end of the year, but I'm not sure there will be an opportunity to sell them early anywhere just because there aren't very many cons over Christmas, unfortunately. But I would say that if you see us at a convention in the future, it will be highly likely that you might be able to get your hands on an early copy.
Awesome. Fantastic. Now, just one last question. I don't know unless anybody else comes up with questions as we're asking, but just because I'm curious, and as I look at my notes, somebody else was curious about this too. We're seeing increasingly some alternative funding platforms, like, for instance, Trigger has recently opened up a Patreon and stuff like that. Do you see that kind of model working for a light novel type company, or even supporting you guys? Would you do something like that for the company in general, or would you even look at something like that to, say, pursue a license?
Well, I am, if anything, a person who loves to brainstorm about alternative business models. And I have thought really long and hard. So let me think here what I want to say. Let's say there was a really long light novel series out there, right? It's popular, relatively popular in Japan, pretty popular in Japan, but like no, maybe only a little bit popular in the West. But it was super, super, super long, and there was no way that anyone that it almost certainly would not really like it might sell enough books for volume one, but by it gets to volume like 30, there's no way like it's going to sell enough copies to actually recoup, right? And it's old enough where it's not going to get the boost, etc. Well, what if there was, say, a Patreon per series, where if you pledge, $5 a month, that gets you a free copy of the ebook it'll get you access to the reading, of course, of the chapters as they're translated, but then it also gets you a copy of the ebook or maybe you could have two tiers where it's like $5 gets you the pre-pub reading and $10 per month gets you the copy of the book or something. And that seems a little high. Well, whatever, something like that. And and the way it works is that as long as the Patreon has a certain number of supporters, then the translation goes at a certain pace. So this is copying, honestly, it's very similar to some of the fan translation models out there, but it's more per series instead of per group. And that would provide sort of a surefire, lower risk way of getting a really long series to just be translated consistently for forever. And that is a model which I'm not sure it's really possible to do. Programming it wouldn't be particularly hard, honestly. I think it would be smarter but maybe it would be smarter to go through a site like Patreon, despite the fact that that would probably be anathema to a Japanese publisher. I'm not sure that it's really practical to do that long term, because what if it fails? What if, what happens, if the number of supporters does dwindle later on? What if it doesn't work well enough to actually succeed? And then what ends up happening is it just poisons the series forever. Right. And so there's a major risk for doing that kind of thing. And if there's anything that about Japanese companies, is that they don't want to risk hurting things. And that, right, I think actually could hurt things. Same thing with Kickstarter in many ways. Like but the embrace of the Kickstarter by the visual novel industry is a good influencer for the other industries. I feel like a Kickstarter type thing, which is like a one-time crowdfunding source, right. That is useful for a series that's complete and maybe did not on its own sell well enough for us to do a print edition, but maybe it has the hardcore supporters that would like want a print edition, if they could pay a lot more, basically. So let's say we have like a 6 or 7 volume series that we finish, and maybe it sold 2,000 copies each for ebook, which is just not going to be enough for us to print it, right? That's not going to sell enough print books to break even. But maybe those 2,000 people who buy it and love it, maybe there's 500 of them that would be willing to pledge a significant amount of money for a print run. And then, we make a nice little box for it. We throw in some postcards, maybe 500 people have the disposable income to get that printed, and we could do that through a Kickstarter. So I'm never going to say no to that kind of alternative funding. It's a very, very series-specific, plan-specific thing. I know from my history with Anime Souls, which I didn't even get into, but let's just put that out there. I know about crowdfunding and what works and what doesn't work. And also very much how much time it takes to do a proper Kickstarter with crowdfunding, getting all the backers their rewards, producing things, doing the community outreach. It is a huge time sink. And if you know me at all, you know that I 100% want to spend as much of my time as possible on content and content creation. And if way too much of my time is spent dealing with crowdfunding, that's taking away from series that I could be doing online as ebooks, which then get more people to read, as opposed to trying to make a fancy box set for 500 people, right?
Right.
So, I mean, like, it's not that I don't want to cater to the top and sort of, hit the high rollers and get some profit from them, I guess you could say. But I feel I'd much rather expand the audience to an even wider range, which just means publishing more. So it's not been my priority as a business. I think it might be a good business opportunity in the future for some specific series. I'm not going to say which ones I'm thinking about, but I've sort of laid out what I think the parameters are for what I would feel would be a good case to apply that business model to. So, business models are these kinds of things where the same thing goes for anime. If you want to go back to the anime situation, like, you're not going to crowdfund the next Naruto, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's just, that's not how it works. But you might crowdfund the next Tatami Galaxy.
Right. Yeah. Or we've seen a couple projects where you've funded like a new dub for an anime that they already had the license for.
Right. I'm actually friends with Pied Piper. I'm really good friends with her, and I even helped just a little bit with the skip beat subtitles. So, not to brag, but oh wait, I'm sorry. It wasn't. Let me correct myself. I'm sorry. It was their previous Kickstarter. The what was it called? The one about the robot girls in the cafe.
Yeah. Don't remember.
Yeah, and we actually we were the ones who did who helped with the timing and the multiple translations for that, the subtitles for that, and then for Skip Beat. Although I wasn't directly involved anymore because I was kind of busy with other things, a lot of my staff or former staff was the ones that worked on those, and so I've actually been kind of involved as a helper and a supporter for those Kickstarters as well. So yeah, I'm really happy about that, and I'm actually very happy with Emma and Arya and those series that get dubs, and I'm just pushing as hard as I can for them to do Tatami Galaxy. I love that series so much because I was the one who translated the anime. So I really hope that they actually get a proper US release for it. I know there was an Australian DVD release which I did the subtitles for, but there really needs to be like a proper American release and on Blu-ray.
That'd be awesome. All right, fantastic. All right, so gentlemen, anybody else got any other questions at this point?
No.
I'm good.
Nope, we're good. All right. Well, I mean, we have kept Sam for almost 2 hours, so I think that's fair enough. Not to mention, I have to now edit the audio on all this, so yeah. So you know what, Sam? It's been awesome having you on the podcast. Very informative, gave me a lot to think about in terms of the industry and everything else, and some nice little tidbits to throw out there about new print editions for people to look forward to. That's pretty awesome as well. To our listeners, I hope you found this just as entertaining and interesting as all of us did, and thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you all again soon. Bye-bye for now. For show notes and related links, visit lightnovelpodcast.com.